Let's start with font size 16 and see how it looks. Okay, I will make it a little bit bigger. 18 is okay. Now I will implement the thin border inside the button. So I will add another view inside the round button component. Okay, and add a style to it, which will be name styles button border. Okay, now let's define this style. So button border, I will make it just a little smaller than the button. So instead of 80 by 80, let's start with, for instance, 76 by 76. Okay, and let's set border radius again to half of the size, so to 38, and border width to 2. Okay, nice. Now I need to center the title again. So justify content center and align items center. So the basic button component is ready now. Now let's try to display the reset button left to the start button, just like on this design. So I first copy the buttons here, and now I pick the colors. So the background is dark gray, the title says reset, and the color, let's assume that it's white. The buttons are displayed one below the other, so I need to put them inside their own container component that will arrange their positions and align them horizontally. So I call it buttons row, and again it's a functional component. Function buttons row, return. Buttons row will just take its children and display it inside a view component that has some additional styling added. So view, and now I just output children here and set the style to styles buttons row. Okay, now I can use this component here and move the buttons inside. Okay, now let's define the style for buttons row component. So buttons row, first I set flex direction to row. Okay, now I will set align self to stretch, so that buttons row takes the whole size of the screen, and set justify content to space between, so that the buttons are located at the sides of the view. I will also add some space above the buttons and below the timer. So margin top is, let's start with 80. Okay, looks good. Now I will also add a small horizontal padding to the container, so that there's a space around the buttons. So let's get back to the container, padding horizontal 20 should be good. Okay, good. Now we have the buttons displayed. In the next step, we will display the labs below the buttons. So let's define the components for them. So we will have a functional component lab that takes two parameters, a lab number and its duration. And now let's implement it as a view wrapping two text components. So text first will display a lab number and another text component will display interval. Next goes the labs table component, so function labs table. It takes a single parameter, which is the array of labs, and I start implementation by wrapping the contents with a scroll view component, so that if there are several labs that don't fit a single screen, I can browse them and see all of them. So scroll view, I need to import it as well. So import scroll view. And inside the scroll view, I just map the labs. So lab index into individual lab elements. So lab number, let's start with index, and interval is just the lab value. Okay, now let's add the styling for the lab component to make it visible. I name the style of the view as just lab, and I also add styling to the text element. So I call it styles lab text, and the same for the interval. Now let's define these styles. So I will start with lab text, and I make it wide. Okay. Now it's good moment to add the labs table below the buttons to have the components displayed, so we could see if the styles are defined correctly. So data labs. Okay. Nice. First thing, I get the warning that each child in an array should have a unique key property. This is used by React to identify elements of the array uniquely if the data changes. The next thing is that the indices are not arranged correctly. We should have lab number 4, then 3, 2, 1. I can fix the numbering by subtracting from the number of labs a current index in a map. So I will change this to labs length minus index. Now this number will identify uniquely each lab, so I can use it also as a key property. Labs length minus index. Let's split it into several lines. Okay, and the warning is gone. Now let's finish the styling. So color is good. I will also make the text bigger, so the same size as for the button components, 18. Okay, and Now I implement style of the wrapping view. First I set flex direction to row, and now I align these two elements at the sides of the screen, just like for the buttons. So I use justify content space between. Okay, and now nothing changed. But why? Because the scroll view does not take the whole screen, only the portion of it. So let's add a style for the scroll view and stretch it across the whole application window. So I will name it just scroll view and set align self as stretch. Now I can go to the scroll view and set the style. Style equals styles scroll view. Okay, now let's add the border between the elements. It is enough to add the top border. So I pick the color from the designs. The color is very similar to the background, so it's hard to catch it, but I got it. And now let's go to the lab. Border color is what I just picked. Border top width is 1. Okay, you can see the border, but it's very dark, but it's okay. And now I will just add some space around the lab data. So padding vertical, let's try if 10 is sufficient. Nice. The last thing to do is to add a space between the buttons and the labs. So let's go back to buttons row component and add margin bottom equal to, let's say, 30. Okay, we've got the space ready. Now we have two more things to do with implementation of the labs. First, it's to parse the duration of a single lab and display it in the very same format as for the main timer. And next, it's to highlight the fastest and the slowest lap. For lap's duration, we could reuse the timer component. And it does exactly what we intend to do, but only contains different styling. We could abstract it a bit and make style its second property. So I put style here, and now I style it with the value passed as a property. Now the style is gone because I need to find the invocation of timer and set the style here. So style it equals to styles timer. Okay, it looks good again. Now I can use the very same component inside the lab. So instead of the text, I use timer. The style remains the same, and the only difference is that now we'll pass interval as a property and not as a child. So interval is equal to interval. Let's close the tag, and we got it working. To highlight the fastest and the slowest lap, I will add two new properties to the lap component, and I will name them just fastest and slowest. Okay, I will pick the colors from the designs and add the corresponding styles. So let's start with picking the colors. First, the fastest lap. Okay, this one will be good.